Tanya. I'm an OpenSciEd teacher and facilitator, and today we're here to chat about Lesson 7 of the Metabolic Reactions Unit. Let's take a minute and remember how we got here from Lesson 6. In Lesson 6, we figured out that some types of molecules, meaning complex carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, decrease by the same amount that other types of molecules, such as glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids, increase. We figured out that different food molecules are broken down at different points of the digestive system, and each organ has a different function. But this left us wondering, how do all of these pieces fit together to explain what's happening to McKenna? So let's take a peek at the lesson at a glance. This is a putting the pieces together lesson. It takes 3 days. There's about 20 minutes of required material preparation in advance. However, there are no hands-on investigations or devices required, and no videos that you need to review in advance. In this 3-day lesson, we have 2 major sense-making sections for students. The first takes place over day 1 and day 2. Here we put together all of the pieces of what we've learned about how a healthy digestive system works. We review and then revise our initial models. We add in all that we've learned and document our findings in a progress tracker. But this leaves us wondering, how does this connect to McKenna? So this leads us into the second sense-making piece. This is on day 3, where students evaluate 5 possible conditions that could be causing McKenna's symptoms. We're able to eliminate some, but are left realizing that we still need to collect more information to be able to actually explain which condition might be causing her symptoms. Let's dig into some of the key moments that happened during this 3-day lesson. The first key moment happens in part 3 on day 1. Here, students collaborate to build their Gotta Have It checklist that will be used to help them make revisions to their models. This is a key moment for students to review what they've learned in prior lessons, as well as identify any areas that still seem confusing to them or they need to ask some clarifying questions about. The creation of this list will help to make the students more confident as they work in their small groups to create the revised models. The second key moment is in part 6, which is about halfway through day 2. At this point, the students have independently created their Gotta Have It checklist, worked collaboratively as a group to create a revised model, reviewed other models and given feedback, and are now ready to put the pieces together as a whole group. All of the parts leading up to this help support the students during this whole group scientist circle opportunity. This is a moment where students are now able to hear from all voices in the classroom, add to their models, change their thinking, and make sure we're all on the same page. This allows us to segue into the creation of our progress tracker, where we will now record what we know about a healthy digestive system and help elevate what we know is different about McKenna's. The final key moment in this lesson is when the students start the assessment task. This is actually a multi-lesson assessment that the students will complete in part 3 on lesson 8. During this assessment, the students can figure out that they can eliminate at least 2 of the possible conditions that might be causing McKenna to be sick, but they do not have enough evidence to eliminate more. However, by the end of part 2 of this assessment, we realize we still need to answer a few more questions before we can narrow it down. So this leaves us thinking, what can we do to figure out which condition McKenna actually has? In the assessment, we noticed that there were some words that we don't quite know yet, such as villi. To be able to eliminate this cause, we need to investigate this further, and this is what leads us to our next lesson. Now let's talk about a few tips and tricks for this lesson. First, since this is a large putting the pieces together moment, both with the consensus model as well as the progress tracker, it may be helpful to co-create a class artifact of the progress tracker where the class as a whole decides what should be included so all students are on the same page. My next suggestion is that the assessment has quite a bit of reading involved. I would suggest planning ahead on chunking the assessment as needed to fit the needs of your students, since you know your students best. This may include reading sections aloud or allowing partner reading and annotating. It's up to you about which strategy works best for your students, but this is something you might wish to plan for. And finally, the last slide includes revisiting the driving question board. I would make sure you don't skip this part, as it's important for students to see how much they've learned so far and help them focus on where they may want to continue going next. In terms of word wall management for this lesson, there are no new words that are earned. However, we do encounter several new words that may seem confusing to students. These are all found within the assessment task itself. These include diverticular disease, celiac disease, irritable bowel syndrome, colitis, Crohn's disease, and gastrointestinal conditions. In terms of poster management, there are a couple posters that you'll want to have available during this lesson, the first being the driving question board as well as your initial model. Then you're going to create the revised classroom consensus model when you're in your scientist circle, and if you so choose, you may want to co-create that progress tracker at this point. And then materials created during the lesson to save for future lessons would be the student assessment task, because you'll need to return that in the next lesson for the students to complete. Materials needed for this lesson include things like chart paper, markers, sticky notes, sticky dots, and access to the posters. I hope this helps you prepare for Lesson 7, which I found to be a really important lesson for my students to slow down and take stock of what they've learned up to this point. Thank you.